Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ready, Set, Action. This is your guide to navigating the world of business growth. I'm Kristina Witmer, a marketing veteran, and I'm joined by Debra Horowitz, who is a talent leader. Each episode, we share actionable tips and insights for small business owners and growth leaders so that you can gain sales, marketing, and employee growth tactics that you can use right now. Today, I want to extend a warm welcome to Jed Jones. He's a leader with over 28 years of experience building scalable marketing and reporting systems, also the founder of Ambient Array. Welcome, Jed.
Hey, Kristina and Deb. Great to see you both.
Good to see you. Good to have you back, actually.
Thanks for having me back. I'm very excited to be here.
Yes, a repeat attender.
There you go. Yes. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's hard to summarize analytics and data and all the things that are out there in one short conversation. So we do appreciate you coming back.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And there's so much to talk about with AI alone that we could have maybe 5 more sessions with you.
Completely agree. There's a lot to tackle. I'll try to give the right level of detail for what we have here time-wise, but look forward to it for sure.
Well, I want to start with a question. I know you've got 28 years of experience, probably started when you were like 3 years old. So
there you go.
We understand.
The math works out.
And you've been really devoted to building the marketing and reporting systems throughout that time, and that to allow companies to scale. And of course, we all want to do that, right? The big thing is being able to have those processes in place to scale. So you've seen a lot in those 28 years in terms of, mistakes that organizations make. What would be maybe one of them that you can pinpoint that they make when they're trying to leverage data for growth, and what would you suggest they do to avoid that type of mistake?
That's a great question. I'd say that what comes to mind first is they go too shallow. A lot of times folks kind of look at data through one lens. They might think of it as a web analytics or maybe call logs or whatever. It could be an Excel spreadsheet that they use every week. So data is really multidimensional. It's become more so. You mentioned AI, obviously. There's a lot more to it, and there's many angles you can take when you approach things with data. So just as a few examples, looking at, you got customer segmentation and persona profiling, you've got lead scoring, you've got account-based marketing. That's where you, of course, take specific accounts that you want to go after and try to really target those using data to figure out what those accounts might be and how to approach them. You've got, personalization by industry or by intent. You've got things like predicting churn, so looking at your sales process and your as you go through a customer life cycle with a client, what does that churn look like, and what are you going to expect in the next year or so, for example. Retention modeling is related to churn prediction, deciding how you can retain people and what that looks like, all the way to geo-targeting, optimizing your sales territory. So whether you have one sales team or you have it broken up by territory, optimizing that in the best way. Analyzing campaign performance and attribution. So looking at where's the return on investment actually coming from. You really have to use data to figure that out. Also intent data monitoring for sales timing. So looking at what folks look like they might be ready to buy what you offer and timing wise, and when is the best time to approach them. Competitor benchmarking and share of voice analysis. So whether it be in a digital space or just in the market in general, if someone were to talk about your company's name versus someone else, what share of voice do you really have in people's mind and people's eyes that they see every day, in eyes and ears? That's another one that's very data driven. And a couple more would be looking at lifetime value analysis and also budget prioritization. So looking at your real budget and looking at how do we prioritize where we should spend in order to get the most result and the most return for our investment. So those are just a few of the ways you can use data. Each one of those is a little world unto itself. But I think just going too shallow would be how I would answer that.
So that's like, what's interesting to me is I I think when you sort of look at each one, you can see how you can apply it. But at first glance, when you hear all of that, you're like, where do I start? Right? Do you help people figure out where to start when they're trying to do this stuff?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Think of what I just read off as almost like a menu at a restaurant. So if you were to go to a
I always
restaurant,
want all of the items. So.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you were to go to your favorite restaurant, whatever that may be, look at the menu. You're not going to order all those items at one time. You're going to choose something that is right for you right now. And it's very similar. So even though all these things exist, it's probably never the case that even large organizations would tackle all of these at once by any means. I think it's good to keep in mind what's available, just so a person or a team can say, gee, what should we tackle next? What's within our resources, et cetera. We'll talk a little bit about that in a little while, I think. But at least knowing what's possible is good. And then you can start with one thing, because doing one thing well is better than just looking at a list of a bunch of things and just not doing any of them because you just don't know where to start. I'd rather see my clients in 3, 6 months, 12 months from now, having tackled 1 or 2 of those and really gotten a handle on that and looking at the measurable results, rather than just kind of being overwhelmed by what's possible and not really starting any of them.
Right. That makes sense. So that kind of ties into, I know that Ambient Array has these, a data-driven approach, and you tend to sort of focus on the 5 key areas. There's configuration and setup, there's situational assessment, model building, I think performance tracking, optimization, I think might be the end piece. So as a small business owner, new to data analytics, situational assessment, what does that look like? How do you approach that? How does the owner approach that?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, to me, that's a fancy word for just saying, where are we right now and where we want to go? And so I like to start, if you're just to get out a whiteboard like I have behind me here, or your favorite journal or your favorite notepad on your computer, and just write down your situation. And of course, that means in the context of what you're trying to solve. Right. So in the context of marketing, you might write down, what are you seeing? Or if you're not quite sure, if you haven't defined that yet, that's a perfect place to start. What doesn't seem right? Start with something simple like, gee, the leads aren't coming in, or gee, when we get something in, we're not sure how to process it yet, or we're not getting quality leads. So we're getting leads, but they're not really converting, whatever that may be. It could be 50 different things, depending on your situation. But just writing that down into a problem statement can be a great place to start. And then right after you define that fairly well, and it might take a few iterations to get it to where it's really clear, then you want to write down what's your goal. So, gee, here's where we are now. Where do we really want to be? And then you're looking at that, they call gap analysis, right? What is that gap in between those two? And start with the next 30 days. Don't make it a year. Don't bite off a whole year. Maybe look at the next 30 to 60 days and say, keep it simple and decide 3 things. What are your constraints? What are the things that you have to stay within the bounds? It could be through the way you do a process. It could be the legality of something. It could be what the available resources are. It could be what your competitors are doing. There are certain constraints around a situation. It could be time that you have. Write those down so you kind of know what you're up against in terms of those constraints and those guardrails. And by the way, constraints, often people think of them as a negative, but I actually see them as a positive. Example I like to use is traffic lights, right, going through town. So traffic lights to a new driver seem like an impediment. Oh gosh, I have to stop at a red light. But without traffic lights, any major city would be in complete chaos, right? So the constraints actually create structure and format. So I wouldn't even look at constraints as a bad thing. It's just, what is it that's keeping us within certain guardrails to move forward? It can actually be a great way to simplify where you are.
Gotcha.
So that's number 1. Number 2 would be tools and resources, and that includes, actual electronic or electric tools, or if you have a physical business, that might be tools as well. And then, of course, human resources. And then the last one would be budget. What are the budget constraints? And so if you have those 3 things in place, you get a pretty good idea of what your situation looks like. We also recommend the good old-fashioned SWOT analysis, right? What are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? Again, those are kind of time-worn and age-tested tools, but they really are helpful as where are we right now? I find that my clients often skip the step of situational because they want to go to the solution. Let's go do a campaign without really knowing where you are right now. And doesn't mean that you're going to stay where you are, but you got to kind of know where you are to know where you're going to go. That is super important. So do not do this in a vacuum. If you happen to run a smaller business where you're often the person in the strategy chair, you don't have a whole team of, a whole board set of board members or other co-managers to work with, then at least once you've done this work, run it by a colleague or a spouse or a significant other or a friend or a neighbor, whoever, talk to, and just find out, say it out loud to yourself. How does this sound when I really say it? When you're forced to say it, to spell it out to someone, it's much easier to see gaps in your thinking than if you're just kind of got it all in your head. If you do have a team, then work with that team. Work with 2 or 3 people. You'll be amazed at what comes out when you put everything on the table and let the blind spots become more clear by discussing going through it.
That's nice. If you have any tools for that, we'll definitely want to share them in the links. I think that could be helpful, for people to start thinking about that.
Great point.
I'm definitely one of those that struggles with process. I am more the creative brain than I am the structured type, and I'm sure I'm not alone out there in the entrepreneurial space,
That's absolutely right. Yeah, and it takes all kinds, and the type of brains that we each have and the way we approach things are going to be part of that equation to make it all happen. So, like you said, Deb, the things that maybe a person doesn't necessarily default to, you have other folks that help you along the way, and then your skills and techniques and talents are going to kick in at that right time when things are set up to go the way they need to go. So
and I do know the importance of the strong process in marketing. Obviously, it's something that you follow. You have an outline and a process that you follow, right?
Right.
To create those reporting systems too. But I think more entrepreneurs would be motivated if they understood how that strong process in marketing and the reporting that you get actually results in higher earnings potential. So maybe you want to speak to that.
Yeah, that's a great point. So what I think the biggest value of this process-oriented approach is that mapping out your steps allows you to understand and define who does what. And when I say who now, that could be a person, a tool, a combination of it. And increasingly in our world, it will be increasingly. There's a great term I like that I hear a lot called human in the loop. So if you do have a kind of a technical process of sorts, the human in the loop is the person or people that actually are involved in making that process happen. So whatever that is, when you do have those steps mapped out, it makes things very, very clear as to who does what when. So imagine, I like to use analogies. So imagine you run a restaurant. If you had just one customer that day, you wouldn't even probably have to have a process. You would just kind of do the natural thing. They want this kind of meal. You're gonna cook that accordingly. But now you have 4 customers, 5 customers, 10, 20 come in at once, or 4 or 5 or 10 parties come in at once. Suddenly, you better hope you have a process so that you know who does what. Okay, you go handle the stove, you go handle the fryer, whatever it may be, you make the salads, whatever the type of food is. That's super important. When you do that, you reduce what psychologists call cognitive load, which is the amount of extra thinking you have to do to get something done. Once you have a process, the cognitive load goes way down, and that means that error rates go down, efficiency goes up, and then you have more time now to actually process, whether it be get new clients, close new leads, or just make your current customers happier than they were before because you've done a better job, done it more quickly. All of that is quite magical when you actually have the process, because the process is, think of it almost like a part of your brain that's now on the outside. You don't have to run it through your mind anymore because those steps have already been done. You just naturally do it. One other quick analogy I would give is when you learn to drive a car, right? They'll say, I remember when I first learned how to drive, I was thinking about, and at the time I was probably using a stick shift. So when do I shift? When do I turn? Signal, your hand on the turn signal. Now, and probably almost everyone on this watching today will agree that once you drive a car after a period of time, it's just all natural. Mm-hmm. Imagine if everything you did was like that. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to use your talents to think through things. You will need to. But now most of those other steps can kind of go into the background of your thinking. And then the most important parts, the parts that require your attention, they come out to the forefront. And that's what that process mapping really helps with.
Oh, that's a really good reminder. Thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I like that. So I'm a marketing agency, and this, I know that you work with a lot of partners for advertising and marketing. Tons of agencies with various analytics and research services. Anything like common challenges or gaps that might be lessons for B2B companies that you've seen across a variety of businesses and agencies supporting that type of business?
So the way I can answer that is what I see in terms of gaps is that certain agencies that push data as a service or push research usually, like I mentioned earlier, have one or two flavors of that they do, which is awesome because that's better than nothing. What the patterns that I see and folks that come to our agency to help them, even with fellow agencies, comes down to usually three things. They often lack the internal analytical teams in-house, especially for certain types of specialty products. So they might have an analyst who's good with numbers, but hasn't really worked in a certain area of subject matter expertise to where they really are comfortable with that type of data. So they're good at putting those things together, but not necessarily with the context that they're doing that in. So lack of those in-house teams, lack of access to special resources. So data is most powerful when you combine your own internal data that you have collected through customers, through transactions, through whether it be server logs or wherever you're collecting data, and combine that with external resources. So when you have access to databases that you get through subscriptions, through direct acquisition like scraping, whatever it may be, there's different ways to get data. Combining your internal data with data you get from other sources makes it that much more powerful. Usually agencies that only do a couple of projects a year at a deeper research level, it doesn't make economic sense to have access to all those types of data resources. And so going to a provider that already has those relationships and subscriptions and all the tools and ability to use them makes it much more economical for them to hire someone like us rather than try to get all those in-house and get up to speed on them in a short time.
Right.
And then the third one would just be not knowing exactly how to apply the data. So it's when if you're new to a data domain or a subject matter expertise area, it can get to where you become, okay, I figured out how to deliver this project, but now how do I go actually apply it to an actual campaign? If you get really lost in the weeds, even if you do a good job of it at the end of the day with getting that data back, it's got to still have the connectors to actual action plans. Sometimes if people lack the experience, they're not necessarily sure how to apply that to the real world. So areas that we tend to help other agencies with are four major areas in terms of data. And that would be segmentation. So figuring out what your market looks like and who your best customers are, persona development, that type of thing. Another word for that is audience definition. And that can be both in the B2C and B2B space. They're different. The methodologies do vary depending on whether you're doing it for households in a B2C situation or businesses in a B2B, but the basic principles of segmentation apply in both cases. That's one. Another one would be automation. So that's becoming more of a buzzword these days with different AI tools that can help with that as well. But the ability to go a little deeper than something you might be able to do on a quick project with automation can be a great way to leverage data, and we often do that for our agency partners. A third one would be digital advertising. Now, technically, that uses data. It's not purely data because it requires other skills, but using data to make better decisions when you set up a campaign, when you monitor and optimize a campaign, making sure you have the right feedback loops set in place to feed data back into the campaign for better optimization is all important for digital advertising. And then website analytics and reporting. So understanding when someone comes to a website, you can use like Google Tag Manager, for example, which is a way of figuring out what events or conversion events happen, and how do you then feed that data back to a Google campaign, a LinkedIn campaign, a Facebook campaign, whatever it is you're running, can be helpful. So those are areas I think where other agencies with plenty of great internal people that do a lot of great things can be bolstered by working with a company like ours that specializes in those more research-oriented applications.
Do you, just a quick follow-up for startups, or like, do you find that if there's not much data to work with at first, should you wait to a certain point to sort of do some of the assessment?
That is a great question. So it is definitely helpful if you have a track record because you have data to now go back and look at. But you can still model things even if you're a completely new startup, for example. So it would be much like analogy I might give would be pretend you're planning like a hiking excursion in maybe the desert in Utah or New Mexico or somewhere where you haven't been there before. If you've already been there, you might be able to reflect on what you've done and say, hey, these are the paths we took. And next time we're going to do it differently, looking at our maps and things. But even if you've never been there, mapping out ahead of time, even though you're looking at the map and not the terrain, you haven't actually seen it yet, still helps. It'll still help you create a more, more successful, more fun type of event. So similar to that in business, if you're starting a new venture, you might map out your market, even though you haven't really attracted customers yet or not enough of them to really form a pattern.
Right.
You can still, for example, exclude. You can say, hey, gosh, these over here probably will never be a customer. You can at least make sort of general assumptions and simplify your process. So now you've narrowed down a much wider market into a smaller market. And then over time, then that will get refined into an even more specific model. So yeah, short answer is, even without having any customers or much of a historical record experience with your company yet, just haven't done much yet, just being able to build those simple models that will be refined later is still gives you a huge head start over just looking at everybody as your total addressable market, which is going to be way too much to bite off and try to chew.
Got it.
Yeah, and I think you're right with that, Jed. There's so many entrepreneurs when they start, they're just like, oh, the world is my oyster. I can go in any different direction, and then you're just spinning your wheels going in too many directions, and you're not making any kind of inroads towards profitability.
You hit the nail on the head, Deb. What you just said is my biggest. The first thing I tell people, and I think you're 100% right, is trying to look at everything as your customer, as your best customer, is usually the recipe for not being successful. And so like you just said, I think just the acknowledgement that some folks are more likely to buy than others, certain folks are going to mesh with our brand, is so essential. And I couldn't agree more.
So you have a PhD in systems thinking, which I believe is totally awesome, although I have no idea what that means. And that's okay. Yeah. It's an academic discipline that I did not know existed, but there's a practicality to it that you put into play in everything that you do to consult with your clients. So is there some sort of tangible example that you can bring to how you utilize that discipline to really help them create that marketing and automation flow?
Great question. So the 30-second history of systems thinking. So the systems thinking that we practice and that I learned in my doctoral program has to do with, it's more of a mental set of processes for how to approach a real world entity or system. So unlike systems thinking, you might think of like a computer system. That is a system. But in this context, we're looking at it more as social systems. So it could be a company, an organization, a small government, a large government, a family, a school. These are all systems in more of a social systems way. Systems generally applies to things like process flows. A system is a construct, right? We're applying a set of mental models to, we'll call this a system. You can look at a company and you can say, in a way, the company itself is its own little system. In another way, the company plus its stakeholders is a system. And so systems is almost just the line you want to draw around an entity for the purposes of approaching it to understand it better. So that's kind of an abstract thing. And so systems thinking is used in many different disciplines, from business to science to sociology to psychology. And that's why you often don't hear about it as its own discipline, because it's really kind of almost a meta-analysis of these other things.
Okay.
And it usually needs to be applied in a context, to your point, Deb. So in this case, we're applying it to marketing and to business. And systems thinking really boils down to understanding that everything exists within a context or an environment. It usually has elements in place that need to be there in order to be self-sustaining. In other words, if you took away enough things, it's no longer a system, it dissolves, it becomes not a thing anymore. And so understanding what those key components are and how they interact with the environment is kind of what a systems thinker does. Systems tend to exchange information and resources with their environments. That could be materials, ideas, information, money, all kinds of things. If it's a physical system, it might be heat exchange, but in this type of system, it's going to be more of those things I just mentioned. They tend to have flows. They tend to have feedback loops. So let's use Google Tag Manager as an example we talked about a few minutes ago. Google Tag Manager is sitting there kind of monitoring your website, looking for interesting things that might be happening, that customers or prospects or casual users are interacting with your website and saying, oh, this thing happened over here, this thing happened over here. That data we call an event, okay? That gets sent back to Google Ads if you have a Google Ads campaign, or Facebook or LinkedIn or something else. That data then becomes a feedback loop in a systemic way back to the campaign, and then the campaign can make better decisions. It can say, gee, when I did X, Y, Z more often, we tended to get this really good result that we liked. Let's do more of that. And so that's that feedback loop that happens. So it's for me, it's really helped me look at marketing campaigns more holistically rather than siloed. My biggest pet peeve working with anyone, whether I'm the customer or I'm the helper, the partner, the vendor, or whatever you call it, is when a person I'm working with looks at it only in their little silo. So, you want to look at the big picture. So go back to our restaurant example. If you are the bus boy, and I was a bus boy when I was a kid, you might only think, oh, I got to clear the place off. But if you see someone needs a glass of water, you might go tell the waitress or waiter, hey, they need some water. That's an example of someone who's not just in their little silo, but they're looking at the bigger picture of the restaurant as a whole. So it drives me nuts when I work with folks, or I'm sure sometimes in the past I've done this, or maybe still do it, where you don't always look at, what about this thing over here? I'm not technically hired to look at that, but I better at least give them a heads up because it's connected somehow. And that's a big deal for me. So I think looking at things holistically, at the end of the day, the system has to work as a whole, not just in the little bucket or silo that you might be assigned to. And that, to me, that's important. And that's one area where systems thinking, I think, has helped me out.
That's a great example. So, yeah. I think we have one more question. We may have a quick rapid fire one at the end, but one more question. So companies, when they're struggling with stagnant revenue, or like the online presence, that's a struggle, or like, what do you typically have something you look at first if you're trying to get leads, or they're trying to grow the lead generation portion?
Yes, I think what it is, I would say, if it were I would sum it up, it would be to get out of your head in terms of what you think your customers really care about your business or how they perceive you. We all do it. It's so hard. I love the phrase I learned recently, was trying to read the label from the inside the jar. I love that phrase because, we've all done it. I do it too. It's really hard to look at things objectively. I think where companies get in trouble, whether you're the CEO or the CMO or a marketing manager or whatever you may be doing, is looking at it from the perspective of how you see your company and not really understanding how other folks, either who do already know who you are or have never heard of you, how they perceive you and what their needs are. So I usually start with a couple things. I'll start with really understanding who your historical customers are, historical meaning today or in recent months or years. And so understanding them from a segmentation perspective, or at least just a general, what type of company are they, what are their needs perspective. And then understanding, most importantly, what are the actual ways that they perceive your value? So not how you want to be seen, but how do they actually see you? That can be done through conversations. It can be done through surveys.
That sounds painful.
Or what was that?
We don't want to know.
I think it sounds painful. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, exactly. So, but once you actually kind of get to that point where you're really mapping to not how do I see myself, my team, my company, my agency, whatever, but looking at how are we actually perceived, that gap is often large. And like I said, we all do it. There is no silver bullet way to get through it, but there are processes and steps you can take to get to where you understand that better. And that's super important.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, just a quick one. This is a short one. So what's like an emerging trend or tech that's companies and owners need to really be paying attention over the next year and a half?
Great question. I would say, if I were to give one thing, I would say it's going to be agentic marketing systems, and that's using agents. So I'll give the 30-second, again, if I can, definition would be, if you imagine processes automation's been around for a long time. Automation historically has been thing A, look at assembly line in an auto plant, right? The frame comes on the line, then they add some piece over here. The next person or machine adds the thing down the road. It's very sequential. It's very algorithmic. This, then this, then this, and that. With agentic systems, what you're able to do now is give an agent, which is a virtual tool, the ability to access multiple tools that it can look at. So if you're a travel agency, it might be looking up rates over here. It might be looking up available opportunities or maps, or looking up what the customer wants over here. It has these different tools. The agent then becomes the thing that goes and decides, what tool do I need right now for this particular process, and how do I get information from that, how I pass information from that tool, get something back and maybe send it on to the next tool. That agent becomes that person, or in quotation marks, that's in control of that situation and knows what it's doing. So it's less about a specific algorithm, and you give more leeway to the agent to make those decisions. As you can imagine, there's a lot that has to happen. You got to put in really good guardrails. You got to make sure that it's going to do the right thing in the right time, and there's a lot of testing that has to occur. As that continues to evolve, there's already great tools like that. That's going to be a super powerful thing moving forward. And if you don't already do something with that, it's at least good to be involved and be aware of what's possible with that, because that's going to be increasingly happening whether we want it to or not. And so might as well have it be part of your business rather than watch it be part of everyone else's business over time.
Okay, that's good. I will add that to my sort of list of things to be paying attention to closely. So awesome. Well, thank you. We hope our audience has found today's episode helpful. And thanks again to Jed for sharing some information. I think you can find him, Jed, at ambientarray.com. We'll put some links in the LinkedIn live stream. And then please don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn or YouTube so you can see future issues or editions. And then you can catch Ready, Set, Action on your favorite podcast platform as well. Hope you all have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Deb.